When we hear the word kamikaze, a singular stark image often comes to mind. A Japanese pilot, bound by a fanatical code, diving his plane into an Allied warship in a final, fiery act of sacrifice. It's an image of absolute devotion, of a warrior who chose death over defeat. But this picture, while powerful, is incomplete. It obscures a more complex and human reality, one that includes not only sacrifice but also survival. Today, we delve into the untold stories of the kamikaze pilots who, against all odds and expectations, returned. The term kamikaze, meaning divine wind, harkens back to the 13th century when typhoons miraculously saved Japan from Mongol invasions. In the final, desperate year of World War II, Japan resurrected this name for a new kind of weapon: special attack units. Young men, many of them university students with their studies cut short, were recruited into these units. They were told that their sacrifice was the ultimate expression of loyalty to the emperor and the only way to protect their homeland from the encroaching Allied forces. The societal pressure was immense. In a culture where the group was valued above the individual, the path of the kamikaze was presented as the most honorable duty. Propaganda portrayed these pilots as selfless heroes, modern-day samurai, embracing a beautiful death for a greater cause. Farewell ceremonies were held, letters were written to families, and their departure was framed as a glorious ascent to martyrdom. The expectation was clear. This was a one-way mission. But what happened when a pilot didn't die? The reality of these missions was far from the clean narrative of propaganda. Survival was often seen not as a miracle, but as a failure. A pilot who returned was often met with suspicion and sometimes even contempt. Did he lose his nerve? Did he intentionally turn back? The stigma was heavy. Some commanders would berate returning pilots, questioning their courage and commitment. One survivor, Takehiko Ena, later wrote about the shame and confusion he felt. He was prepared to die, but mechanical failure forced him to return. Instead of relief, he felt a profound sense of dishonor, a feeling that he had failed his comrades who had already perished. These returning pilots were often sent out again and again, trapped in a horrifying loop. Each dawn brought a new potential final mission. Imagine the psychological toll, waking up each day, saying your goodbyes, preparing for death, only to end the day back where you started, facing the judgment of your peers and the dread of having to do it all over again tomorrow. It was a unique and cruel form of psychological torment. One pilot, Hisashi Tezuka, survived 4 missions before the war ended. Each time he returned, he was placed at the front of the line for the next sortie, his survival marking him for another attempt at death. The reasons for their return were almost always beyond their control. It's a common misconception that every kamikaze plane was a finely tuned instrument of destruction. In reality, by late 1944, Japan's industrial capacity was crippled. Many of the aircraft used, like the Mitsubishi A6M-0, were outdated, and some were even training planes hastily converted for combat. They were often poorly maintained, with a severe shortage of spare parts and experienced mechanics. Engine failure was rampant. A pilot could take off, fly for an hour towards the enemy fleet, and then have his engine sputter and die, forcing him to ditch in the sea or attempt a perilous return to base. Weather was another major factor. The Pacific is known for its sudden and violent squalls. Pilots flying with limited fuel and rudimentary navigation equipment could easily get lost in thick clouds or storms, unable to locate their targets. In these situations, returning was the only logical choice if they hoped to fly another day. And then there was the enemy. By this stage of the war, the U.S. Navy had developed a formidable multi-layered defense system. Radar-directed anti-aircraft fire, known as flak, created a deadly curtain of exploding shells around the fleet. Squadrons of American fighter planes, like the F-6F Hellcat, patrolled the skies, intercepting the attackers long before they could get close. Many kamikaze pilots were shot down miles from their targets. Historical analysis suggests that a significant number of missions, estimates vary, but some place it as high as 1/3 or more, failed to reach their intended targets for these very reasons: mechanical failure, bad weather, or being intercepted and destroyed by Allied defenses. The story of Kiyoshi Ogawa provides a chilling example of the system's grim determination. On his first mission, his plane malfunctioned, and he returned. On his second, he successfully flew into the USS Bunker Hill on May 11, 1945, contributing to one of the most devastating kamikaze attacks of the war. His story illustrates the unforgiving nature of the system. Survival was merely a postponement of the inevitable. For those who did survive the war, the challenges were far from over. Post-war Japan was a nation grappling with defeat and foreign occupation. The very ideals for which these men were prepared to die had been shattered. They were remnants of a discredited military regime, their intended sacrifice now viewed by some as a symbol of the nation's catastrophic folly. Many survivors struggled to reintegrate into a society that was trying to forget the war. They carried the weight of their experiences in silence. They had been trained to die for their country, but were now forced to live in a new Japan that was trying to distance itself from its wartime past. Some, like the aforementioned Takehiko Ina, felt compelled to write down their experiences later in life to ensure the world understood the human reality behind the kamikaze myth. They wanted to explain that they were not fanatics, but young men caught in the gears of a war machine, trying to do what they believed was their duty. Their stories force us to look beyond the stereotype and see the individuals. They were students, sons and brothers who faced an impossible choice. Their survival, whether through a stroke of luck, a mechanical flaw, or the sheer effectiveness of enemy defenses, does not diminish their story. Instead, it adds a crucial, humanizing layer to our understanding of one of the most extreme chapters of World War II. It reminds us that history is not just made up of grand strategies and decisive battles, but of countless individual lives, each with its own story of pressure, fear, and the powerful, unpredictable will to survive. When we hear the word kamikaze, a single stark image often comes to mind. A pilot, headband tied firmly, diving his plane into an enemy warship in a final, fiery act of sacrifice for his emperor and nation. This image of the divine wind warrior has been seared into our collective memory of World War II. It speaks of unwavering devotion, of a culture that placed honor above life itself. But this is only one part of a much larger, more complex, and deeply human story. What about the pilots who didn't die? What about the men who, for one reason or another, returned from these one-way missions? Their stories, often hidden in the shadows of history, are not tales of failure, but of survival against all odds, and of the profound and heavy burden they carried for the rest of their lives. This is the untold story of the kamikaze pilots who lived. To understand their journey, we must first step back into the final, desperate years of the Pacific War. By 1944, Japan was on the defensive. The tide had turned dramatically against the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army. Allied industrial power was overwhelming, and Japan's most experienced pilots had been lost in battles like Midway and the Coral Sea. In this dire situation, a new, desperate tactic was born: the Special Attack Units, or Tokkōtai. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi is often credited as the father of this strategy, believing that crashing planes laden with explosives into enemy warships was the only way left to halt the relentless Allied advance. He famously argued that the spirit of one Japanese youth was a match for the material superiority of the West. The young men chosen for these missions were often not the hardened veterans of the early war. Many were university students, barely out of their teens, their studies in law, literature, and economics cut short by the draft. They were steeped in the Bushido code, the way of the warrior, and a culture that emphasized duty, loyalty, and the ultimate honor of dying for the emperor, who was considered a living god. For many, the call to become a kamikaze pilot was not a choice, but an inevitable duty. The pressure from society, from their military superiors, and even from their own families was immense. To refuse would have brought unimaginable shame. Diaries and letters from these young men reveal a complex mix of emotions: patriotism, fear, a sense of fatalism, and a deep love for the families they were leaving behind. They weren't unfeeling robots. They were sons and brothers, facing their own mortality. The public narrative was one of heroic, willing sacrifice. Propaganda portrayed every pilot as an eager volunteer, ecstatic for the chance to give his life. But the reality was far more nuanced. While some were truly zealous, many felt a crushing sense of obligation rather than enthusiasm. In his final letters, one pilot, Ichizo Hayashi, wrote, "To be honest, I cannot say that the wish to die for the emperor is genuine. However, it is decided for me that I die for the emperor." This sentiment captures the internal conflict many faced. The mission was presented as the most honorable path, and in the context of their time and culture, turning back was unthinkable. This brings us to the central, overlooked part of the kamikaze story: the return. The idea of a kamikaze mission was that it was final. There was no plan for a return journey. Pilots were often given only enough fuel to reach their target area. Yet a significant number of pilots did come back. Historical estimates suggest that somewhere between 25 and 33% of all kamikaze sorties did not end with the pilot crashing into a target. How could this be? The reasons were varied and almost always beyond the pilot's control. The most common cause was mechanical failure. The aircraft used, like the Mitsubishi A6M0, were often old, poorly maintained, or hastily modified. Engines would stall, navigation equipment would fail, or landing gear would refuse to retract, forcing a pilot to abort the mission and attempt a return to base. Another major factor was the weather. Pacific typhoons and dense cloud cover could completely obscure the target area, making it impossible to locate the enemy fleet. Flying into a storm was suicidal, but not in the way the mission intended. In these cases, pilots were under orders to return if they couldn't find their target. Furthermore, Allied defenses were formidable. The Big Blue Blanket, as the US Navy's Combat Air Patrol was known, intercepted many kamikaze flights long before they reached the ships. The anti-aircraft fire from the fleet itself was a dense wall of steel. Many pilots were shot down over the ocean, but some, through incredible skill or sheer luck, managed to evade the onslaught, only to find their plane too damaged or their fuel too low to press the attack. They had no choice but to turn back. Imagine the scene. A pilot, having said his final goodbyes, having mentally prepared for death, suddenly finds himself on a return course. The journey back was fraught with peril. If his plane was damaged, just landing was a life-threatening challenge. But the physical danger was perhaps less daunting than the psychological one awaiting him on the ground. For these men, survival was not a relief. It was a stigma. Their comrades who had flown out with them were gone, and they were still alive. They had failed in their duty. The reception back at base was often cold, even hostile. Some commanders would view the returned pilot with suspicion, questioning his resolve. Did he lose his nerve? Did he intentionally avoid the target? One of the most well-known survivors, Takeo Kasuga, recalled being berated by his commanding officer upon his return. He was placed in a maintenance corps as a form of punishment, forced to do menial tasks while awaiting his next and hopefully successful mission. Another survivor, Hisashi Tezuka, flew 9 kamikaze missions. 9 times he took off, expecting to die. 9 times due to engine trouble, bad weather, or being unable to locate a target, he returned. Each time he faced the scorn of his superiors and the internal torment of having outlived his comrades. He described the feeling as a living hell, caught between a mission to die and a life he wasn't supposed to have. These men lived in a strange limbo, officially dead in the eyes of the military, yet physically alive. They were often ostracized, forced to live apart from other pilots, their very presence a reminder of failure. When the war finally ended on August 15, 1945, with Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast, it brought a different kind of shock for the surviving kamikaze pilots. Their entire world, their entire belief system had collapsed. The Emperor, for whom they were ready to die, was not a god after all. The cause for which they were to sacrifice everything was lost. Their purpose, so stark and absolute just days before, evaporated overnight. For many, this was a profound and disorienting crisis. They were trained to die, not to live in a defeated Japan. The post-war years were incredibly difficult. These survivors carried a double burden: the trauma of war shared by all soldiers and the unique psychological weight of being a failed kamikaze. Many never spoke of their experiences, not even to their families. The shame was too deep. The society that had once pressured them to die now struggled to understand them. Some sought anonymity, trying to blend into a nation rebuilding itself from ashes. Others struggled with immense guilt, what we now recognize as survivor's guilt. Why did they live when their friends had died? Was their survival a betrayal? This internal conflict haunted them for decades. Over time, as Japan changed and the raw wounds of the war began to scar over, some of these survivors started to share their stories. Men like Takeo Kasuga and Hisashi Tezuka became advocates for peace, their testimonies serving as a powerful counter-narrative to the myth of the glorious willing sacrifice. They wanted the world, and especially younger generations of Japanese, to understand the reality behind the propaganda. They spoke of the fear, the coercion, and the profound tragedy of young lives being used as tactical weapons. Their survival, once a source of shame, became a mission in itself. A mission to ensure that such a strategy would never be repeated. Their stories transformed the one-dimensional kamikaze from a symbol into a human being. A young man caught in the unforgiving machinery of war who, by a twist of fate, was given a second chance at life. And in living, they gave us a story not just of sacrifice, but of the enduring, complicated, and powerful will to survive.